Now you can already see my screen. Okay, that's the timetable for the rest of the month. As I told you, we had to correct this activity, the one on the digestion of the chicken sandwich, and a glass of milk, of course. Do I have any volunteer that wants to tell me just the path that this sandwich is following? Because the question has like two parts. The first part would be describe the journey, and then within the journey you've got to explain which are the enzymes that are acting on this sandwich. So the first thing is describing the path. For example, Esther, that you were the last one joining the class. Esther, would you mind telling me the path that this chicken sandwich is following all along your digestive tube, digestive gut? Do you have microphones there? (28 and 41, ¿por qué pone ahí 28 and 41? It is that you had to do. Esther, are you there? Well, she's not. Then anyone that has a microphone and wants to start. Miguel, do you have a microphone? It's not a difficult question. I'm sure that all of you can answer it. So do not panic, be brave. Anyone that wants to be a volunteer answering the path? Marina, Rodrigo, any volunteer? Venga, que empieza a poner nota, si no. Adrian, okay, we've got Olmo. Thank you very much, Olmo. Olmo, could you please tell us the path, just the path that this chicken sandwich and glass of milk is following? Okay, he's writing. Okay. So try to use short sentences so it's more active. It's more fluid. First part would be if any other person with a microphone wants to help Olmo, try to do it a little bit quicker. I'm sure that a lot of you have a microphone. You've got the entire text. Do I send it to you? Okay, if you want to, you can just copy and paste the whole test if you've got it, if you have already typed it. Just copy and paste. Okay, so let's go a little bit higher. Okay. Once the food enters the mouth, so the first thing we've got to say is that the first stage is the mouth. That would be the first thing that we are going to mention. This organ that is the mouth is the first one. So instead of just naming the parts, Olmo already explained what happened in each one. So as according to his text, once the food enters the mouth, the breaking process begins. In which sense? Well, breaking it in a physical way, the food is broken down into smaller pieces by the teeth, and also in a chemical way. One enzyme, that is amylase, produced by the salivary glands, is going to start the digestion, chemical digestion of carbohydrates, turning them into simple structures. Where, in which type of food in this example, where do I find this starch? Well, starch will be a component of the bread in the sandwich. So I would like you to explain somewhere that this starch is present in the bread in the sandwich. Okay, this starch is broken down into disaccharides, okay, not monosaccharides yet, only disaccharides in the mouth, okay. Then the only food that will suffer chemical digestion in the mouth would be the bread, because the chicken does not contain starch, milk does not contain starch, so only bread will suffer this chemical digestion, turning down amylase into disaccharides, while chicken and the bread itself, they also undergone a mechanical digestion. Will the milk suffer any mechanical digestion in your mouth? No, because it's already a liquid. So that was what the activity was asking you to think about. It's not only the general path, but think about each food. Milk will not suffer any mechanical digestion in the mouth, will not suffer any chemical digestion either, because it does not contain starch. Then the only thing you've got to say about milk, if the question was only asking about milk, you would say that it goes from the mouth to the pharynx, and that's it. You wouldn't have to explain anything about the action of teeth or the action of starch, because milk is not going to suffer this action. Okay, does everybody understand this? It's important that you pay attention to the food that is mentioned in the activity. Then it's also asking about a chicken sandwich. So within the chicken sandwich, both components, both the chicken and the bread, will suffer the mechanical digestion, will be broken into pieces using your teeth. But only bread will suffer the action of amylase enzymes produced by the salivary glands. Okay, so the text is perfect, but I would just explain which food is suffering each type of digestion. Then, as we've got here, after that, the milk and the sandwich that are already what? The milk and the sandwich already food bolus, okay, it's not milk anymore, it's not sandwich anymore as a term, but it's already food bolus. They will move all over them. Well, before the esophagus, you've got to mention this tiny part that is the pharynx, okay, this part that is the pharynx, and then after the pharynx we've got all this long tube that is the esophagus. Okay, so from the mouth it goes to the pharynx, and then the food bolus goes down the esophagus thanks to these peristaltic movements. Perfect. But remember, not milk and sandwich, but food bolus move all along the esophagus thanks to the peristaltic movements and end up in the stomach. The cardia, without the C, no C, the cardia sphincter closes, okay, after everything enters, okay, when all food is in, the cardia sphincter closes. It's, in fact, the cardia sphincter is always closed. Right now, your sphincter is closed. Even if you didn't have breakfast, the sphincter is closed. It only opens when it realizes there's peristaltic movements. Then it opens and closes again. But it should be always closed, okay, unless you've got different types of pathologies, but it should be always closed, okay. So instead of saying that it closes after that, I would say that it's always closed and it opens thanks to these peristaltic movements. When the peristaltic movements stop, the cardiac sphincter closes again. There, chicken would be broken down into amino acids or long chains of amino acids by the pepsin. It's not acids. Acids act on the food, but is broken down into amino acids, which are the components of proteins, thanks to mainly this enzyme pepsin. Milk also contains proteins, so apart from this chicken, milk will also receive the action of this pepsin. It's also mixed with gastric juices and some sort of acid. Well, gastric juices contain the pepsin and the acid. So you could say that the chicken from the sandwich is mixed with gastric juices that contain pepsin, and this pepsin will help breaking down the proteins into amino acids. Okay? And you would also say that these gastric juices also contain a type of acid that turns everything into the chyme. Perfect. We've got the explanation on what the chyme is there, and then after that the chyme moves to the small intestine. Perfect. So there's no more action in the stomach apart from the digestion of proteins. In this case, proteins contained both in the chicken and in milk, and everything turning into a liquid substance that is the mechanical digestion. But in this case, you just mention the acids doing this activity. Can anyone tell me who else, what other structure apart from the acids is very important in this transformation of something solid, the food bolus, into something liquid? Anyone else that tells me what else apart from the acids is very important? Acids are included in the gastric juices, but there's another thing that is very important, that is the movement. Perfect, Monica. So muscles in the stomach are going to do this movement that, joined with the acids, will transform it into chyme. Okay, so also mixed with gastric juices and moved by the muscles, the contractions of the muscles in the stomach, these three layers of muscles will all that. And then we arrive in the small intestine where loads of things happens. That amylases break down starch into sugar, the lipases turn the fats into fatty acids, and peptidases turn the proteins into amino acids. Perfect. Well, you could explain that this starch was still present in bread, in the remainings of bread, that the lipases are acting on the fats present in milk and probably chicken as well, and then this peptidase is acting on proteins that are coming from chicken and milk. Okay, so mainly what I've got in my meal is chicken that could be summarized as mainly proteins, bread that could be summarized as mainly starch, and then milk that contains proteins, fats, and also sugars. So I need as well a molecule that transforms my sugars that I already have into monosaccharides. That molecule are disaccharidases, okay, that are also present in pancreatic and intestinal juices. You didn't mention that all these enzymes come from pancreatic and intestinal juices. And there's another thing that is missed there. If I have here lipases is because they were lipids. What is the other thing, the other molecule that is going to act on these lipids before lipases do? Apart from this enzyme lipases, bile will also act on this food containing fats. So biles will emulsify the fats. Perfect. Then you should mention that somewhere here, either before or after that. No worries, okay? That these lipases will be helped by the action of bile that emulsifies the fats. Then chyle, which is a liquid that contains water, some nutrients and not digested material, will go all along the intestine. The nutrients will be absorbed, and then the chyle goes to the large intestine and exists through the anus as feces. Okay, perfect, because it was a very complex activity as it contains all the information in this unit, in this part of the unit, the digestive system. So I would say that's perfect. In fact, I'm going to copy your answer, complete it, and I will include it in the answer key. Si me das permiso, claro que luego dirás, tengo derecho de autor. Bueno, I will correct it, okay, with all these corrections that I've mentioned, and I will include it in the answer key that I will launch in the virtual class, okay? Bueno, you've got also some activities related to this respiratory system that are at least activity 42, I think. Que eso habíamos dicho, ¿verdad? No, 42, no. Is it 42, the one that I asked you to do? Venga, ¿qué me confesáis? 41, esta. Bueno, puede que sea 42 in your photocopy. What does the body use oxygen for? Was it this one? The emission of oxygen. Is it the emission of oxygen? Yes. So, Monica, now that you are there, very easy. What is the emission of this oxygen? Why do we need this oxygen? Monica, the emission of this oxygen. ¿Te atreves, Mónica? Emission of the oxygen. Rodrigo, que estás por ahí, do you want to help, Mónica? What is the emission of this oxygen in your body? Why do we need to take this oxygen? Why is the respiratory system so important? You're writing. Yes, I always ask you to write short sentences so we make it a little bit more fluid. Venga. Monica is doing it. Well, it's a very important question because whenever I ask you what happens if I don't breathe, sometimes you answer that we die if we don't breathe, which is obvious. And if I ask you why do we die, sometimes you say because your lungs need the air. And it's not that your lungs need the air. Your lungs don't care about the air. To combine... ¿Quién no tiene chat?
Yo.
Rodrigo. Bueno, pues me lo cuentas así con el micrófono, que es mejor todavía. I prefer so. Well, she said, Monica said that you...
para obtener energía a partir de...
Okay, can you say it in English? Obtener energía. Rodrigo, you can say obtener energía in English. To obtain energy, as Monica said. So we combine it with nutrients in this process that we call cellular respiration in the mitochondria in our cells, and then we obtain energy. So I was saying that your lungs, in fact, don't care about this oxygen. But they take the oxygen, they give it to blood, and then blood will send it to every cell in your body. And it's important that every organ in your body always has oxygen. But one organ that is very important that receives this oxygen is your brain, okay? Because every organ that remains for a long time not receiving oxygen, this would produce the death of the organ. So I'm sure that you've seen people going to the mountain and having their fingers or their toes frozen, and the cells just die because they didn't receive those nutrients. It was so freeze that blood could not go there, and the cells died. It's the same when you've got a heart attack, that because your blood vessels in the heart, the coronary arteries, are not giving oxygen and nutrients to the heart, parts of these cells, some of them, die. If the heart attack is not very big, if it's only part of this wall in the heart that contracts, that dies, well, these parts will not contract, but as long as the rest of the heart is contracting, you could be alive. But if it's your brain that is not receiving blood and part of your brain dies, that could be even more dangerous, okay? So it's important that every cell in your body receives this oxygen to produce energy in order to maintain the cells alive as well. Okay, well, we've got to go on with our presentation on the respiratory system. You already have it in your virtual class. I guess that you were able to see it. In case you haven't seen it, you've got it here. Contents, you've got all the videos on the classes, and there in the middle here, you've got the presentation on the respiratory system. I told you that I haven't completed the part on healthy habits, okay? I'm going to do it today. So if you downloaded the presentation either yesterday or this morning, it's not going to be the definite one. As long as I launch the definite one, I will write down here that it's already completed, okay? And that's the video on yesterday's class. Okay, so yesterday we saw the components of the respiratory system, and then I'm going to have someone telling me all these components. Rodrigo, now that I know that you've got this microphone with you, could you tell me what's the first place that air is going to get in? What's the name of the first structure? ¿Hay alguien más con micrófono además de Rodrigo? Porque lo estoy oyendo por ahí. Adrián, you've got microphone as well.
The nose.
The nose, okay. The nose is the external structure. So we should say that the first part that the air gets in is the nasal cavity. There's a difference, okay? Probably in primary school you can say the nose, but the nose is this external structure. So the air will not go through my external nose. It gets in through the nostrils and it enters inside the nasal cavity. Okay, so I want everybody to write down in the exam that the first stage is not the nose itself, but is the nasal cavity. Probably don't see a big difference, but there is a difference. What is going to happen in the nose, in the nasal cavity? What is going to happen in the nasal cavity? Three important things. Who is going to tell me these three processes, either using the chat or the microphone? Three things, three important things that happen in this nasal cavity. The air
Gets warm.
Gets warm, perfect. It also Puede ayudarle a alguien más, si quiere. You can finish if you want to, but if anyone else knows the other process, you can either write it down or just use the microphone. Claudia, Paula. Adrian, they don't want to help you. So apart from cleaning the air, warming out the air, you're going to
Moisten it.
moisten the air, that it was transforming it into something a little bit humid. Okay, that's because in the membrane in which gas exchange happens, so in the walls of the alveoli, the exchange of gases happens better, easier, if the air is a little bit humid. Well, that is easy to be seen in another type of respiration, which is the cutaneous respiration. Do you know any animal that undergoes cutaneous respiration? ¿Conocéis de alguno? One animal that is able to do cutaneous respiration. Estáis muy inactivos hoy, ¿eh? Snakes, I'm not sure, but I would say no, because they have a hard skin. It needs to be someone with an animal with a thinner skin. Snakes are reptiles, so they do have lungs, complex lungs that help them breathe in. It's another tiny animal, frog. Okay, perfect, frogs. In order to do this cutaneous respiration, frogs must be humid. If they are dry, they can only use the lungs. Or even if they are underwater, once they are underwater, have you ever seen frogs opening their mouth when they are underwater? Because if you're underwater, you cannot use the skin as a surface of gas exchange. Frogs need to be outside water, but moisten, a little bit humid, and then they can do this cutaneous respiration. It's because the surface in cutaneous respiration must be humid. Well, it's the same in branchial respiration. They need to be humid. They are, because they are underwater. But in lungs, we also need a humid, a moistened surface of gas exchange. And it is moistened as long as our air is a little bit moistened. Apart from that, I'm always taking some water vapor when I'm breathing. We see it perfectly when we exhale this air and it's very cold outside. You're going to see this water vapor condense. We need this water vapor in our lungs in order to maintain all that humid and help this gas exchange. Well, so the functions of this nasal cavity are filtering, warming up, and moistening this air. Then from the nasal cavity, air goes to the pharynx, this common structure. And then following the pharynx, what is the next stage in our respiratory system? After the pharynx, we've got what do we have after the pharynx? Vamos, chicos. After the pharynx, we already have something before the trachea. The trachea is the long tube that starts here, but we've got a tiny structure here. One thing is the pharynx, that is all this cavity. Then the big cavity enters a tiny structure in which we find the vocal cords, but the name of the structure is the larynx. Okay, in the larynx, which is this structure here, inside the larynx, if I could look up this tube, inside I've got the vocal cords, but the larynx is all this fragment here, this part of the tube that is protected in a better way because it contains this very important organ that are the vocal cords. Okay, so the green part is the larynx, then from the larynx air goes to the trachea, and remember we mentioned important things about this trachea that were the rings that had this C-shaped in order to let the esophagus dilating, having enough room. This trachea divided into bronchi, and then bronchi that still contain cartilaginous tissue. They will turn into bronchioli with no cartilaginous tissue. And they end up in the alveoli. Okay, so these bronchioli, each one will end up in one of these alveoli. Okay, alveoli, this would be the end of the bronchiole. Bronchiole ends up in this alveoli. Alveoli are all then surrounded by capillaries coming from arteries and sending out blood through veins. The tiny artery, arteriole, the tiny artery ends up in a net of capillaries. These capillaries will be doing the gas exchange, taking all the oxygen, sending out the carbon dioxide, and then this blood containing very little carbon dioxide and a lot of oxygen will go back to the heart. So this artery is bringing from the heart blood that contains little oxygen and a lot of carbon dioxide, and is receiving again blood that contains a lot. Is it very far away, the heart? Is it very far away from the lungs? No, it's not. It's just there, very close. So the part of the heart that sends blood to the lungs does not need a very strong muscle. But the part of the heart that is going to send blood either to the head or the last part of your feet will need a strong muscle because it needs to pump blood very far away. We'll see that in the respiratory system. But I want you to realize how close the heart and the lungs are. They are very close. Okay, so we saw yesterday all the tube, and I want you to pay attention to this structure here. That is, all these alveoli, all these bubbles are alveoli, and each alveoli is surrounded by these capillaries. What you've got represented there in blue is blood with very little oxygen and a lot of carbon dioxide. And then we are sending out red blood that is represented in red because it contains a lot of oxygen and very little carbon dioxide. Okay, well, keep in mind this picture that is going to be important this unit. What we are going to see now is how my body takes this air in. How are lungs getting this air? Because if you pay attention to the lungs, if we do the dissection, you're going to see that lungs are fluffy. They are very soft. They are not hard, not rigid at all. In fact, lungs do not have any muscular layer. It's very easy for the stomach to increase the size receiving food and mixed this food because it has a lot of muscles. But how could my lungs increase the size, taking this oxygen and sending out this air when they don't need it anymore, if they don't have any muscle? How is everything coordinated if this organ does not contain any muscular layer? Well, there's different tricks, hay trucos, different tricks that my lungs have. One very important thing that my lungs have is this term, that is the pleura. Pleura, you've got it represented in your book in page number 45. You've got a picture representing your lungs, in which you can see that, as we said yesterday, the right lung has 3 lobes, 1, 2, and 3. You also have it in your book, while the left lung, it only has 2 lobes. Well, in your book, you also have the pleural fluid represented. What is this pleural fluid? This pleural fluid is going to be here in this, inside this pleural space. Pleura is just a membrane, but it's a special membrane that is protecting your lungs, is the membrane that covers your lungs, but it has a liquid in the middle, because your lungs are going to increase and decrease the size loads of times, and I don't want to damage this external part of the lung. This part of the pleura will be connected with the bones that cover the lungs. Does anyone know the name of the bones that are covering my lungs? What's the English for? That's the ribs, okay? So the pleura will be connected to the ribs, and in fact, even though the lungs do not have any muscles, because the ribs do have them, that would be the way we've got the structure we've got for the ribs. In among the ribs, in between 2 ribs, that's always what we call the intercostal muscles, los músculos intercostales. Intercostal because we've got them among ribs. These muscles could contract, and when they do, your thorax increases the size. Because the ribs are connected to the pleura, it's like having chewing gum. When you separate these parts, the lung will increase the size. When you put the rib cavity smaller, the lungs will get smaller as well, okay? So depending on the size of the cage, of the box, the lungs will increase their size or decrease the size. The connection with these ribs is very important, and is thanks to the pleura, and is all protected by this liquid in the pleural space. So 2 pleura and liquid in the pleural space. That's important. Apart from the action of the ribs, someone else is going to have a very important role. What's the other component that has a very important role in this process of getting air in, inspiration, and sending air out, expiration? Who else, apart from the ribs, have a very important role? Someone on the bottom. What do we have on the bottom? Bueno, we're going to see the picture again, the original picture, the first one. Tenemos por ahí alguien que ha dicho the heart. No, it's not the heart, it's this muscle, the diaphragm. The diaphragm is separate, is a muscle, continuous muscle. So if you cut my body, it's like the bottom of this higher part of my body, the bottom of the thorax and the beginning of the abdomen. Separating the thorax from the abdomen, we've got this muscle. So the heart and the lungs are on the top of the diaphragm, and they're here just behind the diaphragm. I would have the stomach, the intestine, and so on, everything in all the organs in my abdomen. In these higher parts, I've got the heart and the lungs. But as you can see, the diaphragm will not touch, no le toca, the heart. Is only there at the bottom of the lungs. This diaphragm in this picture is relaxed. ¿Vale? Esto es importante. The diaphragm is a muscle, and as a muscle, it could be contract or relaxed. In this moment, with this C-shaped, moving to the upper part, así, that is the relaxed position of my diaphragm. So if I contract it, the diaphragm turns into something flat. What's the difference between this diaphragm relaxed and one that is contract in an horizontal way? That the contracted diaphragm leaves more space for the lungs. So it's going to increase the size of the lungs as well. Well, this is what happens in this movement of pulmonary ventilation in the process that we know as inhalation. Inhalation means that the air moves in. I can open my mouth as much as I want, but the air will not get in unless I do a negative pressure in my body. How do I do this negative pressure? It's like in a syringe doing this movement. So you put the air inside this syringe when you put it downward. Well, we need to do the same in our respiratory system. We need to do this negative pressure so air moves in. How do we do this negative pressure? Two different muscles will act. One is this diaphragm that, as you can see here, it was relaxed, and when it contracts, we've got this flattened structure. It's more flat, so we've got more surface for these lungs. And the other muscles are going to be the intercostal muscles, the rib muscles, that when they contract, they move the ribs upwards. So they make this box, the rib cage, they make it bigger, wider. So we've got more space, and then air gets in. So this red arrows that could be a little bit confusing, do not think that is air that it's moving. It's just that the muscles make my ribs get bigger, and when they relax, they're going to make my rib cage smaller. That's the process of exhalation. I've got to give you an advice here. In Spanish, the two processes are inhalar y exhalar, pero no de morirse, de exhalar, ¿vale? Sino exhalar. It's a difference. But in English, we say it with an X, exhalation, and that doesn't mean that you are dying, okay? Bueno, so two muscles that are important in this pulmonary ventilation. Then if I had to, if the question in the exam was, that it will probably be, explain the two movements in the pulmonary ventilation, you've got to tell me that the two movements are inhalation, that is when the air gets inside the lungs, and it happens thanks to the diaphragm that contracts and therefore moves downwards, and the intercostal muscles or rib muscles that also contract and therefore move upwards. And this leaves more space for the lungs, therefore air gets in. The other movement is exhalation. The diaphragm relax, moving upward again. The intercostal muscles relax, moving downward again. Because there's no room in the lungs, this air will be sent out and I'm exhaling. That's the process of pulmonary ventilation, which is not the same as gas exchange. We'll see gas exchange in our following class. So we'll have on Monday this process of gas exchange, and then Thursday will be illness and healthy habits. Friday, the review, and then next Monday, the first exam. Okay, so we'll see this process, gas exchange, the following day, then just the homework, and you will have 1 or 2 spare minutes. What is going to be your homework? Well, very easy, just activities 36 and 37, which are, well, 36, 37 and 38, que esta es una palabra solo. 36, 37 and 38, creo que son esos números. ¿Son esos números en vuestra fotocopia también? Que ya me hago un lío. Bueno, the first 3 in the respiratory system. Muscles that move to increase the size of your thorax, just the name of the muscles. What is ventilation, a definition, and which type of tissue is the diaphragm made of. Very easy activities. Any doubt?